Today I'm talking about a topic that I see a lot of questions about online. People are very, very curious about this topic of perfect pitch. What is it? Who has it? Do you have it? Do I have it? What does it mean? How is it experienced in people that have it? And also, we're also going to look at if you don't have it, which is most likely given how rare this is. What can you do to be able to play by ear anyway, even if you don't have that ability? Perfect pitch is so rare that it's something like 1 in every 10,000, I think it was 10,000 people have it. That's how rare it is. But we seem to, as a whole, be very fascinated with it. Obviously, because it's so rare, we're fascinated with it. But a lot of people wonder if they have it, and there is some confusion around that. So hopefully by the end of today's broadcast, you will know exactly whether or not you have it. If you have it, usually you know about it, okay? It's very, very obvious to people that have it, both positive and negative effects, and we're going to get into that just very shortly. But yeah, very rare ability. And what is it exactly? Perfect pitch is a very rare ability in a person, so rare that it's 1 in 10,000, to identify or recreate a given musical note without the benefit of a reference tone. Okay, and that last bit, without a benefit of reference tone, is what makes it perfect pitch or absolute pitch. There's sort of two terms that we can use. We use perfect pitch most often as a term in popular culture, but absolute pitch is also in the mix as well. And here's the difference. Absolute pitch, normally you are able to identify any given pitch without a reference note. So, for instance, you might hear a musical instrument play a note, you'd be able to recognize what note that is immediately, right? Or you might hear a sound in everyday life, like a honking of a car horn, and know what note that is. That's absolute pitch, right? Absolute, meaning you just know absolutely what each pitch that you hear is without a reference note. Perfect pitch is kind of an extra step where you're able to hum or sing a pitch at will without a reference note. And that's any pitch. So you'll be able to say, okay, what's A440? And just be able to go, Now, I don't have perfect pitch, so what I just sung will not be the exact note. But the thing is that when you've been a musician for a while, sometimes you can kind of hit the ballpark, and that comes with training your musical ear. And so that's why some people might wonder if they do have perfect pitch, because they can go, oh, I've kind of taught myself to be able to sing, middle C with reasonable accuracy. But that's not perfect pitch, because those who have perfect pitch or absolute pitch obviously are perfect. They're able to hit it right on. And if they don't hit it right on, it doesn't feel right to them. They just know instinctually that it's not exactly on the exact pitch. So if you're able to go sort of train yourself from, if you do it every day and train yourself to recognize middle C or something like that, then you can train yourself to do that. But you're going to be still in a very minute range of that note, and whether or not you have perfect pitch is what determines whether you hit that note straight on, and you just know. And everyone who, you can measure it with a pitch measurer. I don't know what a pitch measurer is called. That just flew out of my brain. A pitch measurer, you can measure the frequency, right, and be able to know whether it is bang on middle C or not. So, who has it? What causes this ability? Well, it's actually more common in people who spend their early childhoods around East Asia. And the reason for that is a lot of those East Asian dialects use pitch in their language. So they more often have an ability to hit an exact pitch because they're growing up around this language that uses pitches in their language. Isn't that cool? It's also more common in blind people, and people with Williams syndrome and on the autistic spectrum. So those are some things, groups of people where it can be more common in, but still as a whole, as a population, that rarity of 1 in 10,000 still exists. So who has perfect pitch? Well, there are a number of very famous, well-known musicians who you're not going to be surprised at all that they have it. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, Ludwig van Beethoven, right? Frederick Chopin, Ella Fitzgerald, Brian Wilson from the Beach Boys, Michael Jackson, Whitney Houston, Celine Dion, Mariah Carey, Jacob Collier more recently, and also Charlie Puth. So, am I missing out if I don't have perfect pitch? Well, those with perfect pitch or absolute pitch are well positioned. Obviously, they have a huge advantage to play music by ear, given their ability to hear and identify pitches without reference. Okay, and of course we know the famous stories of Mozart going to hear an orchestra once and then going home and transcribing the music that he heard that one time because he was able, while he was listening, to identify what was going on. However, it's actually not all puppies and roses and rainbows. Those with perfect pitch can actually become distressed when an instrument is slightly out of tune or a song is heard in a key that isn't the original correct key. These sorts of things can actually be very distracting and can be distressing when those with perfect pitch hear pitches that are slightly off what they should be. It's kind of, if you think about perfectionism being the needing things to be perfect, having perfect pitch is much the same. It's sort of a perfectionism with the pitches that you hear. So it can actually be very distracting and distressing to those with it. And in fact, I've heard interviews with Jacob Collier where he has talked about this ability and how he'll get distracted by all the pitches that he hears, even just out in the world. So while it is a very rare trait and can definitely prove an advantage as a musician, having perfect pitch is not always the golden ticket, right? Those who possess this ability and want to apply it to music, they still need to train in learning about their instrument, becoming proficient at their instrument. They still need to learn the technique to play it. They still need to learn music theory in order to apply their perfect pitch in a musical context. So it has its advantages for sure, but having perfect pitch does not necessarily mean that you are instantly and without any hard work an incredible musician. Whether you have or don't have perfect pitch, becoming a musician still requires ongoing training, as I mentioned, and practice. And when we understand that having perfect pitch isn't necessarily a golden ticket to magically just being an amazing musician, it sort of takes away that myth, like sort of wonder and envy that we have of this ability. Though it certainly does make things easier, it's not the whole package. So now that we understand the reality of this trait that has so much myth surrounding it, and regardless of whether we have it or not, you'll still need to learn to be a musician, and we can train our ear to sort of assimilate this sort of ability in a way. So what we can develop, though we can't develop perfect pitch, that is something that you are either have or don't have. What we can develop is something called relative pitch. And so that's where that definition comes in, because perfect pitch or absolute pitch is being able to identify pitches without a reference tone. When we can develop relative pitch, that is when we can identify pitches with a reference tone. So it's relative to another pitch. As long as we have one pitch that is known, our reference pitch, then we can use our ear and what we've trained our ear and our brain to be able to recognize in music, to be able to reference any other pitches we hear in relation to our reference pitch, and therefore relative to that reference pitch, be able to figure out what is happening when we hear music. By using relative pitch, musicians can understand the relationship between notes and therefore entire melodic and harmonic passages without needing to know which specific pitches are in play. Isn't that cool? So relative pitch is available to everyone. We can all learn how to do it. So how do I get relative pitch, right? That's what we're wondering. That sounds pretty cool. So through training in a number of different areas, musicians can learn to recognize not just individual pitches, but we can also start to recognize groups of pitches, which we call chords or harmony. We can also work on our ear training in order to identify rhythms, which is not so much pitches, but how those pitches are played throughout time, right? That's what our rhythm is. We can also train our ear to be able to recognize different timbre. So that's, the tone of different instruments, and that might not seem, when you hear one instrument on its own, you think, okay, that's obviously a violin, I can do that pretty well. That's great. But when we hear lots of instruments together, the ability to separate out those different timbres and notice which instrument is playing what becomes more difficult, and that's something we can also practice. So practicing all these things equips you for playing your instrument by ear. You can develop relative pitch with training. Some people will find ear training easier to start with. Others might find it very difficult from the beginning, but you can practice, and it is a skill that you can learn. Of course, playing by ear is definitely helped by having perfect pitch or absolute pitch, but it is also improved by developing our relative pitch. It's by no means only enjoyable at the 100% finish line, right? You can enjoy playing by ear and the small degrees of playing by ear as you go along the journey. It's not like I'm going to have to train my ear for 5 to 10 years and then I'll be able to play a song by ear. No, you can train your ear to recognize the first thing that you train your ear to be able to recognize. That might be a interval of a major third, right? If you can only recognize a major third, that is incredible, and it's just going to allow you to be able to figure out so many things. Step by step, you're going to improve level by level in the area of playing by ear. So if you want to come on this journey and you want to develop your relative pitch so that you can play by ear, I want to encourage you to sign up for my free listening challenge. It's called the Active Listening Challenge. It's pretty cool. This is going to be happening in July. Start turning your ears on. Let's turn up the volume on your musical ears so that you can begin to develop your relative pitch and develop your ability to play the piano by ear.